In January 1818, a London publisher printed 500 copies of a novel in 3 volumes with no author's name anywhere on it. There was an unsigned preface arguing for the story's scientific plausibility and a dedication to one of the most notorious radical philosophers in England. Readers did the obvious arithmetic. The book had to be the work of a man, probably a poet, and probably that philosopher's son-in-law. They were wrong. It had been started by an 18-year-old girl in a rented house above a lake because somebody dared her to write a ghost story, and people kept refusing to accept it. Reviewers handed the credit to her husband. Later, it got argued at book length. What finally settled, it wasn't a letter, or a confession, or anything she ever said out loud. It was her own handwriting and a computer, Mary Shelley, widowed at 24, and the reason the word Frankenstein means anything at all. She was born on the 30th of August, 1797, in London. The delivery itself went well enough. What went wrong came after it, with the placenta and the infection that followed. 11 days later, her mother was dead. That mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who 5 years earlier had published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, an argument that women weren't born inferior to men, but were educated into looking that way. It is one of the founding books of English feminism, and it made her notorious. The father was William Godwin, a philosopher who had argued in print that governments and institutions mostly make people worse. So the house was radical, well-known, and suddenly one parent short. Godwin was left with a newborn and a 3-year-old, Fanny, Wollstonecraft's daughter from an earlier relationship. He was not, by anyone's account including his own, a natural at raising them. In 1801, Godwin married a neighbour, Mary Jane Claremont, a widow with 2 children of her own. The accounts of that marriage agree on one thing. The new wife resented how close the girl was to her father and did what she could to keep them apart and keep her out of his books. It didn't work. Her formal schooling came to almost nothing, a few months at a boarding school in Ramsgate when she was 13. Everything else she got in that house, with the run of one of the best private libraries in London and a father who actually believed his own arguments about educating girls. She heard Coleridge recite the rhyme of the ancient mariner in Godwin's front room. Humphrey Davy and William Nicholson, the 2 men in England doing the most with galvanic electricity, were part of her father's circle. Hold that thought. And when she wanted to be out of the house, she walked up to St Pancras churchyard and sat by her mother's grave with a book. That's where she taught herself to write. It's also where, in June 1814, a poet 5 years older than her told her he was in love with her. The poet was Percy Bysshe Shelley, and he was already married. His wife Harriet was pregnant with their 2nd child. He was an admirer of Godwin's philosophy and a regular at the house, and when Godwin worked out what was going on, he banned him from it. So, on the night of the 28th of July, 1814, Mary left instead. She was 16. She took her stepsister Claire Claremont with her and crossed to France with a man who had a wife at home, which in 1814 was not something a woman came back from. Her father, the great radical, then refused to speak to her for 2 years. The money ran out almost at once and never really came back. In February 1815, she had a daughter, 2 months early. The baby died on the 6th of March, not 2 weeks old. Mary was 17, unmarried, cut off, and burying a child. A son, William, arrived the following January. Hold on to Percy. What happens to him is the last thing in this story. In the summer of 1816, Mary went to Lake Geneva with her lover, her stepsister, and a 5-month-old baby. Byron had taken the Villa Diodati for the season and brought his personal physician, John Polidori. The Shelleys rented a cottage below it. And the weather never arrived. That summer barely happened in Europe, wet and cold and dark for weeks on end, and the party spent it indoors reading German ghost stories out of a French anthology called Phantasmagoriana. Then Byron proposed they each write one of their own. Byron gave up on his. Percy gave up on his. Polidori wrote something that turned into the first modern vampire story in English. Mary got nothing for days and had to sit through being asked about it at breakfast every single morning. Then one night, after the men had stayed up late arguing about whether a dead body could be made to move again with electricity, she lay awake in the dark and saw it. She had grown up in a house where the men doing that work came to dinner. Not a plot, a picture. She set down what she'd seen 15 years later, and it is the sentence everybody still quotes.
I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together.
She was 18. The draft took her about a year, and she wrote most of it through the worst autumn of her life. In October 1816, her half-sister Fanny, the one Godwin had raised alongside her, travelled alone to Swansea, took a room at an inn, and killed herself with laudanum. She was 22. Nobody from the family went to claim her, because Godwin's instruction was to leave her where she was and let the obscurity she had wanted stand. 6 weeks later, Harriet Shelley was pulled out of the Serpentine in Hyde Park. She'd been missing for weeks, and she was pregnant. 2 women dead inside 2 months, and one of them was in that water partly because of the man Mary had run away with. Harriet's death also, brutally, left him free to marry. They did it on the 30th of December, 1816, at a church in the City of London, and Godwin, who hadn't spoken to his daughter in over 2 years, turned up and was delighted about it. Mary was 19. She went back to the manuscript. The book went on sale on the first day of 1818 from a small London house called Lackington. The preface, the one arguing that the events in the story weren't scientifically impossible, was written by Percy, and he didn't sign it. The dedication was to William Godwin, her father. Put those 2 facts next to a title page with no author on it, and you can see exactly how the confusion started, because it started at once. Sir Walter Scott reviewed it in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, admired it a great deal, and assumed the author was Percy Shelley. He wasn't being stupid. He was reading the evidence in front of him. Mary's name didn't go on the book at all until a French translation in 1821. It didn't appear on an English edition until 1823, 5 years after it came out, and by then the assumption had had 5 years to set. Some of the people who'd made it never revisited it, and some of the people who came after them turned it into an argument that outlived everybody involved. In 1818, the Shelleys moved to Italy, and Italy took their children. Clara Everina had been born in Buckinghamshire in September 1817. She died in Venice in September 1818, aged 1, of dysentery, at the end of a forced journey across the country in the heat that her father had insisted on. 9 months later, in June 1819, William died of malaria in Rome. He was 3. He was the baby who had been carried up to Lake Geneva, the child who was alive for the whole of Frankenstein and didn't outlast it by long. Mary was 21, and she had buried 3 children in 4 years. She stopped writing for months. Then in November 1819 she had a 4th, a son, born in Florence and named Percy Florence for it. He was the only one of the 4 who grew up. He outlived her by 38 years, and he is the reason you know the end of this story at all. On the 8th of July, 1822, Percy sailed out of Livorno for home in a small boat that had been delivered to him that spring. A squall came through the Gulf of Spezia that afternoon, short and violent. The boat went down with everybody on board. He was 29. His friend Edward Williams died with him, and so did an 18-year-old crewman called Charles Vivian, who almost nobody remembers. The bodies came ashore over the next 10 days, past recognizing. Tuscan quarantine law said a body off the sea burned where it landed, so in the middle of August they built a pyre on the beach and cremated him in front of Byron and Leigh Hunt. And then something happened that people have argued about ever since. Edward Trelawny, who ran the cremation, said an organ came out of that fire whole and unburnt, and that he reached into the embers and pulled it out with his bare hand. He said it was the heart. Mary took it from him. She kept it. For 200 years, on and off, people kept insisting that Mary hadn't written her own novel. The claim never quite died. It got a whole book of its own in 2007 from a writer called John Lauritsen, and the title said, "The Quiet Part Out Loud, the Man Who Wrote Frankenstein." What killed it was paper. Her working notebooks survive. In 1996, a scholar named Charles Robinson published a full transcription of them, her draft in her handwriting, every one of Percy's changes in his, sitting in the margins in different ink. His contribution is real, and it runs to something like 3,000 to 4,000 words in a novel of about 72,000. That's what an editor does. It isn't what an author does. Then, in 2023, 2 mathematicians at the University of Edinburgh ran the whole text through a stylometric analysis, measuring word frequencies against Mary's other novels, Percy's writing, and her father's. Their finding was that the evidence Mary wrote, it is extremely substantial, and that Percy, having played a heavy role, is very improbable. 2 smaller things while we're here. Frankenstein is the man who builds the creature, not the creature. And the flat head and the bolts in the neck come from a film made in 1931, 113 years after the book, with nothing remotely like them in anything she wrote. She came back to England in 1823 with a 3-year-old and no income. Percy's father, Sir Timothy Shelley, controlled the estate, loathed everything about the marriage, and set his terms plainly. He'd pay an allowance for his grandson, on condition that she never published a biography of his son, and never put the Shelley name into print without his permission. So she went round him. She edited Percy's poems and hid the biography in the footnotes, and the 1839 edition she produced, her notes running underneath his verse page after page, did more than anything else to turn him from a minor scandal into a major English poet. The rest of the time she wrote for money, because there was no other money. Valperga, Le Doreur, Faulkner, stories for the annuals. And in 1826, The Last Man, a novel about a plague that empties the entire planet, written by a woman who had watched nearly everyone she loved die young. It sold badly and the reviewers were cruel about it. It's the one people go to after Frankenstein now. Sir Timothy held on until 1844, by which point she was 46. The headaches had begun when she was in her early 40s. By 1839 they were constant, with dizziness, pain in her hands and legs and eyes, and sometimes convulsions. In late 1850 her speech started to fail and one side of her body stopped answering. By the end she was paralyzed and having seizures. She died on the 1st of February 1851 in London, aged 53. What went on the record was disease of the brain, supposed tumor in the left hemisphere, of long standing. No autopsy was done, so nobody ever confirmed it, and a paper in the Lancet Neurology in 2018 argued the whole pattern fits something else instead, hemiplegic migraine, a condition that had no name in 1851, causing repeated strokes across years. Either way, she had been ill for over a decade, and nothing anyone knew how to do was going to help. And then her son opened her writing desk. Inside it, folded into a page of Adonais, the elegy Percy had written for John Keats, was whatever came out of the fire at Viareggio. She'd had it for 29 years. Accounts differ on what happened to it after that. The better documented one has it buried with Percy Florence in 1889 in the family vault at Bournemouth, where she is buried and where her parents were reburied so she could lie between them. Whether it was ever a heart is still open. Doctors have been pointing out for well over a century that a heart doesn't survive hours in a fire, and the guesses run from calcified tissue to a liver. She never doubted it once. Frankenstein has not been out of print since 1818. The critic Brian Aldiss called it the first true science fiction novel in a history of the genre he published in 1973, and the label stuck hard enough that she gets called the mother of the whole form now. The 1931 film gave the creature a shape every child on Earth can draw, and it did that by throwing away almost everything she actually wrote. Her creature teaches itself to read. It reads Paradise Lost. It argues its own case out loud, and it wins the argument against the man who made it. That's why the book is still here. It was never really about a monster. It's about somebody who makes a thing, refuses to be responsible for what he's made, and gets destroyed by what he walked away from. And that question has not got any smaller since. She wrote her own last word on it in 1831, at 34, introducing a new edition, 15 years after that summer at the lake.
And now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper.
She was 18 when she saw it, 20 when it went out with no name attached, and 53 when she died with what was left of her husband folded into a poem in her desk. The novel outlived every single person who insisted she hadn't written it. And the argument about whether a teenage girl could have done it ran for 2 centuries, right up until somebody finally went and looked at her handwriting.